Hello, and welcome to the Art of Being Human. I thought today I would talk to you about insulin. Diabetes is a very progressive disease. It's chronic, it's progressive, and unless some kind of a miracle happens, you do not get over it. It just gets worse and worse and worse with time. And generally speaking, you end up by using more and more and more insulin with time. Things do get worse. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't have a good life. It doesn't mean that you can't keep things under control, but it is progressive. And so, therefore, people who start off with pills or people who start off with nothing except a diagnosis and they're exercising and they're on a special diet, some people can live like this and control their diabetes for years, but most of us can't. Most of us are going to progress to the point where we have to have medication, and that lasts for a few years. And then after that, you have to start thinking about taking insulin or a combination of insulin and medication, and that lasts for a few years. And as the years progress as a diabetic, you will end up by taking more and more and more medication and more and more and more insulin. That's the way it is. It's a progressive illness. But it's been known as an illness for years and years and years. Diabetes is an illness that's practically started at the beginning of time, whenever that was. So I want to tell you the history of what happened, that people started to use insulin to help them control the illness so they could live normal lives. So this is kind of a historic review of the use of insulin. But diabetes was recognized as an illness for thousands and thousands of years. They knew some of the symptoms, but they didn't know what caused the symptoms. And the symptoms that they recognized early on, even in ancient Egyptian times, was a person would urinate too much. And it was considered to be a disease of passing water because they would urinate so much. And then they would lose weight, and the body would kind of waste away. And then within a few years, they were dead. Sometimes quickly, sometimes it took a few years. And the only way they could control it was the person eats very, very little. And if they ate very, very little, they lasted longer. They lived longer. But there was no control of it. They had no knowledge as to why the body was doing what it was doing, but they recognized it as a disease where you were losing a lot of water and gradually wasting away. So the Egyptians, they studied medicine, and there was an Egyptian medical textbook that was written in 1550 BC. That's how old the treatment started. 1550 BC, and it described diabetes as a condition of passing too much urine, and it was named that. In the 2nd century AD, the illness was given a name which was a Greek word that meant siphon. And basically it was the same thing. People were urinating so much, and the body was trying to siphon something off. So the Greek word for diabetes meant siphon. Now, there is a reason for going to the bathroom so much. If you're diabetic and you have all kinds of sugar in your system, the body is geared to try to get well. The body is geared to try to get rid of things it shouldn't have. So when your sugar level gets very, very high, and without any insulin and without any medication, of course it would, what do? You go to the bathroom. The kidneys, the sugar is shunted down into the kidneys, and the kidneys are trying to get rid of the sugar by urinating. And so that's what it was. The main symptoms they noticed was urinating a lot, weight loss. This is kind of like the wasting away that I mentioned. And also the urine was very sweet smelling. This may gross you out a little bit, but I'll tell it to you anyway. One way that diabetes was diagnosed in ancient times was that they would take a urine sample from a person who had it, and they would pour it close to an anthill. And if the ants rushed toward it because they were attracted to it, then it meant that there was too much sugar. Your urine had a lot of sugar, and the ants were attracted to the sugar, so they would run over to see what it was all about. And that's how they diagnosed it. Well, in 1776, they discovered that people with diabetes was passing sugar from the blood to the urine, but they didn't understand what was the mechanism by which that happened. So they had made some steps forward, but it was really an enigma. They really did not understand it. So in 1889, German scientists discovered that the pancreas was involved in diabetes because they were doing research, and they were doing some animal research. And if the pancreas was taken out of an animal, or if they did an autopsy on a person with diabetes, then they discovered that the person, the pancreas had all shriveled up. There would be some times when a person would die of diabetes, all kinds of people dying of diabetes. There was no treatment for it. And they would do an autopsy, and they would find that the pancreas, which produces the insulin, was all shriveled up. It was like a little tiny bunch of tissue. It wasn't like an organ hardly at all. So they knew there was that kind of a connection. But then they tended to think that there was something in the pancreas that stopped diabetes from happening. They didn't look at diabetes as a condition in which the pancreas was not producing insulin. They looked at the pancreas as having something within it that would stop diabetes from occurring. So they were kind of looking at it in an opposite way. And if they could find out what that was, they could prevent diabetes. Well, insulin cells were finally injected into a 14-year-old boy that was dying, and he didn't die. He lived for another 15 years. So what some doctors, in fact, one doctor in 1921, Dr. Frederick Banting, he was a surgeon. He isolated cells from the islets of Langerhans. Now, the islets of Langerhans is a group of cells that is all over the pancreas, and they have beta cells within them that produces the insulin. So he took the cells, he took the beta cells, he took the islet of Langerhans and got those and injected them into a boy who had diabetes, and the boy recovered. Now, I say recovered. He didn't become completely well, but his symptoms were under control to the point where he lived 15 years by having the injections of the beta cells into his body. Now, of course, we don't do that. We know the hormone is insulin, and we take the insulin and inject that in. But at that stage of development, at that stage of research, what they did was take the actual cells from the Isles of Langerhans and inject them into a person with diabetes, and their symptoms would be under control, and they could continue to live a fairly normal life. Now, where did they get the insulin from? I imagine they got it from cadavers, people who died of other things other than diabetes, maybe from animal sources, who knows. But the idea is they got the cells into a person's system, and that prevented them from getting the complications, and they could live a normal life. Now, this 14-year-old boy who was dying of diabetes, they knew what it was, but they injected the cells into him. He recovered enough, so he lived another 15 years. And when he died, he didn't die of a diabetic-related illness. He died of something else. So it wasn't the diabetes that killed him. If he hadn't had another infection, if he hadn't had pneumonia, he could have probably still lived for another few years. So that was a great breakthrough. By the mid-1920s, insulin was used for diabetic patients and gave them a great amount of relief. And that's after many years of research, using animals for research, taking the pancreas out, putting parts of the pancreas back in, finding out what actually would work. It was just a problem that people were dying, and they were wasting away, and they were going to the bathroom all the time, and no one could understand what it was. It was discovered, of course, that it was diabetes. It went by different names, and then the connection was made between the pancreas and diabetes through research that they did, and they finally found ways of injecting part of the pancreatic cells back into the body of people people who had diabetes, and that gave them a lot of relief, and they were able to live. And then it became refined, more and more and more refined. Now, we don't get insulin from cadavers. I imagine that's what they did, but now it's made in a lab. And you have different types of insulin, and insulin that acts at different lengths of time, long-lasting, short-acting, and of course the delivery system is usually either from an insulin pump or from injections. So that was an interesting thing. And, you know, if they had other ways of checking for diabetes. So there's one thing I want to mention to you. They use glucose strips. Before the modern era of using meters, they used glucose strips. And I'm going to show you a picture of it. And let me describe this as I go along. That's what I used in the beginning. That's what my father used. My father was diabetic. They didn't have meters or anything like that. They used glucose strips. Now, glucose strips were just a regular strip. I don't remember exactly what they look like. I have used them. But you got them in a bottle. And in the bottle, there were, the bottle was all color-coded. And what you did was produce a urine sample, take one of the test strips, stick it in, and then part of it would change color, and then you match up the color of the test strip with the color that's coded on the bottle that contains the strips, and say this turns green, and so it matches this green here, and then there's a little notation on the side of it as to what your blood sugar is probably, what it probably is, because it'll match. If you have a lot of sugar in your system, then it gets darker and darker. If you have it black, then you have way too much sugar in your system, and you're checking it through the urine. You're not checking it through the blood. So it basically is you use a test strip, you put it in a urine sample, and then you match it to the color that's on the bottle that contains the strips, and that will tell you approximately what your blood sugar is. Now, there are some things wrong with this system. It's still used. I think you can still get the glucose strips. But the things that make it difficult is that it's kind of guesswork. It's not really as precise as you need. And it tests the blood sugar as it used to be years ago, I mean months ago or hours ago. I should say hours ago. You eat a meal, you digest the meal, and it takes a few hours before it actually gets through the digestive process and gets to the kidneys, and then the extra sugar is excreted. So you're actually checking what your blood sugar was 2 or 3 hours before when you first ate. That's going to make it inaccurate because there's a 2 or 3 hour wait here before you can even test it. And the other thing is that it's not particularly accurate, and the results can be altered. They can be altered if you take vitamin C, that will alter it. Aspirin will alter it. Your fluid intake will alter it, and so also if you're dehydrated. And so therefore, it's kind of like the beginning part of trying to check for blood sugar so you know what you need for insulin, but it's the first kind of step in that direction. And as I say, I still think they do produce these. One thing I want to mention is that ketones, type 1 diabetics have to worry about ketones. Type 2s usually do not have to worry about it. But there is a urine test which is similar to this that's used to find out if you have ketones in your urine, or if you have ketoacidosis, as it's called. Now, the problem is, if you have it, then you're in danger, because what's happening is that your cells aren't getting the sugar that they're not getting sugar because the insulin isn't putting it into your cells, so the cells are starving, and it's converting your fat into food, into energy. It's digesting the fat in your system, and it throws everything off, produces ketones, and it's very dangerous. If you have ketones in your urine, you need to call a doctor immediately or get to an emergency room. It is a very, very dangerous situation. However, type 2s usually don't have to worry about ketones, only type 1s. But it is a urine test that's similar to this. You have a bottle that's coded. You know, you have a strip, you put the strip in a urine sample, and you can figure out from that, and it's coded in such a way that you can figure out if you have ketones, and that's how they discover whether you have ketoacidosis. So there is a similar type of test for ketoacidosis. These are glucose strips, and they just work to check what your blood sugar is, not whether you have ketones in the blood, but in the urine. But ketones, if you have them, then you're in danger. So those are the first tests. Now, modern glucose meters are not like that. Modern glucose meters can check very quickly what your blood sugar is in the here and now, not 2 hours previous. And it has different ways of doing it. It gets to be kind of high tech. Some of them check the nervous impulses in your fingers as the blood goes by. Some of them check in different kinds of ways, but it's like a lab test, and it can be done quickly. The first meter that I got was a meter that was very inexpensive, but it was accurate. But it took 40 seconds. I would have to put the blood on the end of the strip and then stick it in, and the strip was like this big. It was quite long, and you stuck it into the meter, and then you had to count back by 40 seconds before you could get a result, even though the result was accurate. Well, they don't do that now. You put the strip in, and you put the blood on it, you stick the thing on it, and the strip is already in the machine when you do that, and within 5 seconds you have results, and so you know immediately what it is. Now, you do have to have it checked to make sure that your meter is accurate, because if it's not accurate, it will give you the wrong information, and you may end up by taking the wrong amount of insulin. So it is important that it be accurate, and it needs to be checked every so often. There was, in a little, a while back, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, someone tried to develop a watch where you wouldn't have to use a lancet to stab yourself to kind of get the blood drop for your results. It was like a watch. I think it was called the Discoverer or something. It's no longer being made. And it would check your perspiration on your wrist and check every 5 minutes for what your blood sugar was. You wore it like a watch. It was really quite big, you know. It wasn't like a little watch. It was like huge and thick. But every 5 seconds, every 5 minutes, I should say, it would check the blood sugar. And it didn't work out that well, and I think now the company's gone out of business and they don't make them anymore. But there is a way, and they're trying to have a way, where you can check your blood sugar without having to use the lancets and the lancing devices to kind of poke yourself, which can be a real pain. Plus, as you do this 4 or 5 times a day, or however many times you do it, your fingers develop calluses, and it gets harder and harder and harder to get blood from them in order to find out what your blood sugar is. They do have some meters that work on your arms, so you can check on your arms instead of your fingers, but that gets to be a royal pain too. I tried that, and pretty soon you see all these little dots all over your arm where you've used the lancet device. So it's a work in progress. What they want to do now is to find a device where all you have to do, like when they check the oxygen level, they stick a little device on you, it reads it, they take it off. If you're at 96 to 98, you're in good shape. It measures the oxygen in your blood. They don't use lancets. They put this little device on your finger. They hold it there for a few minutes, just a little ways. They take it off and they register. It's painless. There's no lancets. There's no poking. There's nothing like that. And they are trying to make a device that will do that, so that when you want your blood sugar checked, or you have to have your blood sugar checked, they just put it on and it reads it off, and that's it. And that's kind of the goal, and they've been doing research on this. I read where sensors have been devised where they can put the sensors on the top of your wrist and just lay them there, and it will pick up your blood sugar. Somehow it detects it, either from your perspiration or whatever. I don't know how chemically it's done, but I don't know how much luck luck they've had with these. I don't see anything like that on the market. I've read about them, but I've never seen anything like that. So you end up by having sore fingers. But you change your lancets every day, and they're very thin, and so they don't have to prick very far, but it is a pain, and you have to do it. So this is all kind of the history of where we are now from where we were, having nothing to help us to figure out our blood sugar, no way to treat it, to finding out that the pancreas was involved, to finding out that you could inject cells from the pancreas to a person, and that would control the symptoms, and they would get well for a period of time, to the point of just directly injecting the insulin, which is far better. So this is kind of the history of it. They started using insulin injections in the 1920s, and that seems like a long time ago to many people, but that was before I was born, of course. But it's been refined and refined and refined, so it gets better and better. And the needles are very thin. Generally speaking, when you inject yourself with insulin, it does not hurt. There's no pain to it. Once in a while you'll feel something, but the syringes are basically for single use only. Then you use another one. Each time you do an injection, you use another insulin syringe, and that keeps it painless. If you use it more than once, then there's a chance of infection, and also the tip gets rough, and then it gets so it's more painful. It's rougher going in. So I want to give you this kind of history so you'll understand where this comes from and where the treatment comes from. And it will get better and better with time. It really will. You just have to hang tough. Do what you can to preserve yourself. Do what you can to keep healthy. So I'm going to close it here. We're almost out of time. And we're going to start next time to do neuropathy of the stomach. What happens to the digestion? I want to go over the digestive processes and how that occurs, and how your blood sugar works and that, and how you get food into your system and how it digests, and what happens to you if you're diabetic, and what happens to your digestion if you're diabetic. You do have neuropathy, you do have complications with that. We need to get into all of that. So we'll start with that next time. So please join me then.